I'm an ethnographer. I'm a PhD student in the Institute of Ethnology and Cultural Anthropology in the University of Warsaw. And I would like to tell you about my ethnographic research among one religious movement, which is called Catholic traditionalism. I refer the notion of traditionalists to Catholics who regularly attend so-called Tridentine Mass and share objections to the Second Vatican Council, as well as to changes in Catholicism that have occurred afterwards. The Tridentine Mass was a default form of in the Roman Catholic Church until a liturgical reform introduced a few years after the Council. The reform resulted in promulgation of new rite of the Mass, which replaced the older one. Since the reform, priests could use the old Mass, the old Missal, only with special permission from their bishop, so-called indult. In 2007, by promulgation of a document, Summorum Pontificum, Pope Benedict XVI allowed all priests to celebrate the Tridentine Mass without special permission. But the notion of indulters remained the popular term for these traditionalists who retain a full communion with the Church. There are also some schismatic groups. The most famous are the followers of priestly fraternity of St. Pius X, established by Archbishop Lefebvre. They found both the council and the liturgical reform heretic, and they were excommunicated by the Pope John Paul II. Benedict XVI withdrew the excommunication, but the ministry of the fraternity is still considered illegal by the Holy See. There are also some more radical groups like sedevacantists who claim that the papal throne is empty. Sedevacante means the empty throne, and followers of alternative popes, which they elect on their own. I'm mostly concerned with indulters, with these people who retain the full communion with the Church. They usually do not find the council's decrees heretic, but criticize results of their implementations, calling it post-conciliarity. In Poland, posoborowie. Some of them participate also in the new masses, but often complained about liturgical abuses they see there. And what is interesting, although they are not as extremely critical as Lefebvrists and sedevacantists, they seem to be even more combative and more subversive due to their endeavors to remain obedient to the Church and change something in it from inside. Is there any problem? Is there any problems? Because I hear somebody.
Excuse me, can all the participants, Bashir, sorry, all the participants, can you please turn off your mics because we can hear you talking. Only Rafał will have his mic on, and everyone else, can you please, because we can hear some noises in the background. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please continue. Sorry about that.
Okay, thanks. In 1998, there were 5 churches in Poland where the Tridentine Mass was regularly celebrated. In Poznań, Katowice, Chorzów, Kraków, and Warsaw. 7 years later, the situation was the same, but in the last decade, however, we can see a rapid development of the movement. In 2019, there were 45 places with regular Tridentine Mass. In Warsaw, yes, and as far as social sciences are concerned, Catholic traditionalism seems to be underrepresented. There were a few works considering the social dimensions of the movement's development, describing its internal diversity, forms of authority it constructs, as well as the adjustment of its global features to local circumstances. It was also analyzed in notions of an identity crisis and as a revivalist movement. In these works, Catholic traditionalism is treated as an unintended consequence of the post-conciliar reforms. However, the mainstream church's response seems to be taken for granted by the authors. They seem to assume that this is only traditionalism, not the church's reaction. What is worth a question, why did it happen? In contrast to them, I would like to focus my question on the relation between the mainstream church and traditionalists. Thus, I can see two unintended consequences of the conciliar reforms I would like to take into consideration. The first is the strategy of lay involvement, which resulted in defiance of considerable groups of laymen, I mean traditionalists. The second, these groups of laymen have a strong experience of clerical power exercised on them, despite a visible trend of reducing symbolic power manifestations among clergy. Following Lila Abulugod's suggestion to use resistance as a diagnostic of power, I would like to answer the question, what may traditionalist movement tell us about shifts in power relations in the post-conciliar church, post-conciliar Catholic Church? Catholicism, as some specifically understood hierarchy as something established to serve a human person. The nature of the church authority is defined as moral authority. It is divided into the authority of teaching, sanctifying, and ruling, but this is explicitly defined authority. It is a subject of study for theologians and experts in the canon law. As a cultural anthropologist, I'm more concerned with the implicit power relations within the church. By implicit, I mean these relations which are not formally defined, but perceivable in what is called lived religion. I'm going to present various ways of reconciling defiance and subordinations by traditionalists. I analyzed them using Michel de Certeau's notion of social strategies and tactics. By strategy, Michel de Certeau meant power relations regulated by the agent within his own place. On the contrary, the tactic is a response to such strategy in a way unintended by its authors. To use a tactic means to employ possibilities found in the place of the other. I refer these notions to traditionalist competence in utilizing post-conciliar strategies of the church instead of rejecting them. My research began in January 2019 and is still ongoing. Initially, it was limited to participant observation and in-depth interviews with members of two groups in Warsaw, the Altar Boys, who create a kind of informal community in Warsaw, and an organization of young traditionalist men whose anonymity I would like to preserve now. Thus, I call them the Guild in my presentation. Discovering their connections with other traditionalists all over Poland, I decided to broaden my research, encompassing another group of people connected with Inicjatywa Włodowicka Foundation, which organizes 3 events for Polish traditionalist milieu each year. Tradiclaro Montana, it is a pilgrimage to Częstochowa, Tradicolekcje, spiritual retreat, and Tradicamp, an integration event. I also regularly participate in the Guild meetings as well as other traditionalist events in Warsaw. My informants are young people, usually under 30. Most of them are males, intellectual workers, university students, and also teenagers. And I would like to name these strategies of the church I mentioned. The first is lay involvement. Second Vatican Council laid particular stress on the role of laymen in the church and called the laity to broaden and intensify apostolic activity. of the layman. In the following decades, this call was implemented in numerous dimensions. Theology and spiritual literature became focused on problems such as family, youth, work, and there were more and more lay missionaries and more lay workers in the church administration. However, the most visible sign of lay apostolate are new ecclesial movements, such as Neo-Catechumenal Way, Renewal and Holy Spirit, and so on. Each of them has its own spirituality and aesthetics, sometimes borrowed from other confessions, like from Orthodoxy or Pentecostal Protestantism or Judaism. They create an alternative for a territorial structure of the church, as they usually collect believers from different parishes, different dioceses, loosening ties with them. What is also specific to them, to these new movements, is the ecclesiology of communion, which assumes brotherly relationship between lay believers and clergy. The second is spiritual and liturgical pluralism. Spiritual pluralism leads to liturgical one because some elements of new movements, spiritualities, diffuse to ordinary parochial masses. In consequence, we can often hear gospel singing, folk songs, and relics of Gregorian chants during one Catholic celebrations. The ordinary Catholic Mass now is some kind of hybrid. Although pluralism is commonly associated with liberty, my informants' experiences, my informants show that it may be also hierarchical and oppressive. They mention numerous examples of priests refusing to celebrate the Tridentine Mass in their parish without any explanations, but with negative emotional reaction instead. One of my informants told me about a parish priest who flew into Fari getting to know that the funeral Mass someone ordered in his church was going to be celebrated in Tridentine rite. And I heard a lot of such examples. There's no place to mention all of them. But even if traditionalists get permission or to organize a Mass, I would like to remind that in the eye of the Holy See, they don't need to any permission, but Polish priests not always permit them to celebrate the Mass, to organize a Mass. Even if they get such permission, they are sometimes told that they should not invite other people, not publish information in the social media. It was the case of the Guild, the group I study, who was welcomed in one parish and allowed for organizing Tridentine liturgy, but only for them. Due to obstacles the priest made, they went to another parish. A new priest who was delegated to lead them refused to celebrate Tridentine Mass because he does not need it, but he allowed them to organize a meeting in a parochial room on the condition that they would involve somehow in parish life. They did not want to participate in the new Mass because they don't like it, but they regard. They offered their involvement in other parochial worship instead. They led a rosary, served to different other worships. Nevertheless, the priest found it insufficient to prove their unity with the parish and continually forced them to participate in the new Mass. Their situation revealed that inequality inscribed in the liturgical pluralism. Their situation revealed an inequality inscribed in the liturgical pluralism. The expected involvement of laymen was rather an involvement previously defined by the clergymen than their own propositions.
Rafał, we should move to the conclusions to have a short discussion because at 12:20 we should start another session, and we should also have a room for coffee. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to conclusions. We can also see some the strategy of reduction of symbolic power manifestations. I try to rapidly say what I mean. I mean, for example, that the custom of kissing priests' hands almost completely disappeared. Kissing bishops' ring is preserved, but less and less common. Sorry, this is a bishop of Rome who refused to kiss his ring. My informants complained about bishops who did not allow them to kiss his ring. Seeing such bishop, and this would be a conclusion, seeing such bishop, one may regard that he depreciates his higher status and wants to be in more egalitarian relation with laymen. He seems to prefer being treated as an ordinary person. Nevertheless, my informants' intention in such situations, it's not to honor a person, but his apostolic dignity. Kissing a bishop's ring is important for their identity as followers of the apostles' successors. Depriving them of this possibility is a real act of power. It unveils more social distance than the ritual act they desire. Refusing the latter did not limit authority, but shifted it from institutional to personal dimensions. The tactics of traditionalists are establishing communities based on traditional lay services, traditionalization of new rite of the Mass. Because of liturgical pluralism, they are able to put their traditional elements to all this hybrid, liturgical hybrid. They also have a tactic they call a liturgical guerrilla. It means that they gain liturgical knowledge on their own, and they become able to organize masses on their own, which results in very highly emotional, negative reaction of parish priests. And to sum up, the Second Vatican Council reformers wanted to break up with triumphalism and monarchical style of the Church. Indeed, in the following decades, we can see a reduction of the symbolic power and status manifestations in the clergyman way of being, as well as in the liturgy. However, traditionalist difficult relationship with the clergy shows that what was veiled under these manifestations was not reduced, but transformed. The higher status of the clergy did not cease to be higher when its ritual representation was limited. On the contrary, without such representation, which obligate both the layman and the priest, it is easier to transform the institutional authority into the authority of the individual. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Because we are running out of time, let's just gather some questions, and we will have then, and let's not start the next debate at 12:20. So now let's gather some questions. If somebody would like to address.
I can start if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got two questions. One is one regarding the number of masses you showed and the growing number of masses in this traditional way you showed on one of the first slides that and there is a significant rise from like 5 in 2007 to 45 in 2019. So can you perhaps try to give some explanation of this rise? How would you explain this phenomena? That's one question. And the second question, can you tell us a little bit about your empirical approach, your methodology? You mentioned that you used participant observation? Did you also carried out some interviews with these people, or it was just? I just wanted to have a little bit of the background of your approach. Thanks.
Okay. If there are any other questions. Okay. Then I was wondering if you can make us, if you can tell us how your research integrates probably with other similar researches in the region. For example, and not coming from the power relations, but maybe like similar research, I don't know, regarding Orthodox Church, or there is now a revitalization of some like new faith, new religious faith in maybe in a populist or I don't know, radical form. So is there any, are you integrated in a field of similar researches, or you just relate to research of anthropological research of power relations? So this would be it. If you can take and you can answer in like 1 or 2 minutes, I think we will be grateful.
Okay. As far as the development of the movement is concerned, I think that it is much because of social media development, and there often there are very young people who expand their liturgical knowledge with the media, with the open access, with the Allegro or eBay, where they can buy old liturgical books, which they can learn from. This rapid movement is based on very young people involvement, and they share this knowledge in such mainly on the social media, which is kind of underground way for the church hierarchy. The default way is to go to seminary, become a priest, and know how to serve a liturgy. In traditionalist movement, where people want to kiss priests' hands, it is not peculiar when teenagers teach the priest how to serve the mass. It is normal for them, and there are a lot of examples of that. So I think that this involvement of the youth is some explanation of the rapid movement. As far as my methods are concerned, yes, I do in-depth interviews with the groups I mentioned. I do participate observation, especially at their meetings in parishes, different events they organize, retreats, and so on and so on. As far as the relation to the other religious study, my research is still ongoing, and I, in the near future, I have to relate to studies not only in the Catholic zone, but also with the study of the different the other denominations, mainly because my institute is strongly concerned on the Orthodox Church or on the Eastern Christianity. So it would be some kind of obligatory for them. But what I want to say, I have not do that yet. But earlier I studied the old believers in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So I will refer to the studies of the Eastern Christianity also.